He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're not family. You don't belong here." That was the moment I realized the man standing at my mother's casket was no grieving husband. He was a gatekeeper, a thief, and a liar. I wasn't even allowed to say goodbye to my mother. No final words. No closure. But if Roy thought he could erase me from her life and her legacy, he was sorely mistaken. Because I didn't just attend her funeral in spirit, I made sure that Roy's next ceremony wouldn't have anyone standing by his side, especially not as he faced the judge. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who should have protected your family, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more real revenge stories that hit deep. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 30 years old, and I was my mother's only child. Growing up, it was just the two of us. My mom, June, was the strongest woman I knew until she met Roy. He swept in when I was in college, a charming older man who promised her stability and love. I didn't trust him from the beginning, but Mom said I was being overly protective. I stepped back. I let her be happy. Or so I thought. I moved out, built a life, and didn't interfere. But I still called every weekend. Except the last time I called, she didn't pick up. A week later, I found out she had passed. No call from Roy. No invitation to the funeral. I learned about it from a neighbor. And when I showed up, Roy met me at the cemetery gate like a bouncer. Told me I had no place there. That was the moment everything shifted. I knew something wasn't right. And I wasn't about to let that man bury my mother's memory with his lies. Not without a fight. People think losing a parent is the hardest part. But what really broke me was realizing I lost her long before she died. And no one saw it but me. I was raised in a tiny rental house just outside of Spokane. My mom worked double shifts at a nursing home and still made time to braid my hair and pack homemade lunches. We were poor, sure, but we were close. She used to call us Team Carter. But things started shifting during my senior year of college. That's when Roy entered the picture. Roy was a retired Navy mechanic who looked good on paper, steady income, soft-spoken, always ready to help out. I met him one Christmas when I flew home from university. He had already moved in. My mom was glowing, calling him her second chance. I smiled. I told her I was happy for her. But in my gut, something felt off. It started small. He interrupted her a lot when she spoke. He'd correct her in front of me about things like the way she told stories, or even the dates of family events. Once I brought up a childhood memory, and he smirked and said, "She exaggerates everything, Evelyn. You'll learn not to take her so seriously." I laughed it off. My mom looked down at her plate. That's when the distancing began. Phone calls became shorter. She said she was just tired or busy with Roy. She stopped visiting me in Seattle. On holidays, it was always Roy's family first. One day I confronted her. "Mom, are you okay? You don't sound like yourself." She hesitated. Then she said, "Roy doesn't like me sharing too much. He says family matters should stay private." Private. From me. Her daughter. I swallowed my anger. I thought maybe I was just being sensitive. I had my own career to build teaching at a local community college, scraping by on loans, rent, and cheap ramen. I figured I'd give her space. After all, Roy hadn't done anything directly to me. But that's the thing about abusers. They don't have to raise their hands to leave bruises. I started noticing little red flags whenever I did visit. The house was pristine, too pristine. My mom wasn't allowed to cook anymore because Roy liked things his way. She stopped wearing her favorite colors. She'd flinch if a door slammed too loudly. One night she walked me to my car after dinner. I hugged her, and she whispered, "I'm sorry, baby." I asked, "Sorry for what?" She just shook her head. "Take care of yourself." It felt like a goodbye. I didn't know how final it would be. The next call I got was silence. Then a week later, a neighbor texted me. June passed. Heart attack. Funeral was yesterday. Where were you? I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. I drove 6 hours straight back to Spokane. I didn't even pack. I just went. And there he was. Roy. Wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, standing at the edge of her grave, like some kind of grieving prince. But when I stepped forward, he blocked me. "Evelyn," he said coolly, "this isn't your place anymore." I was stunned. "She was my mother," I choked. "She was my wife," he snapped. "You made your choices. Now respect hers." I didn't make a scene. I didn't scream or cry. I turned and walked back to my car with my fists clenched. But that night in my motel room, I opened my laptop. And I started digging. I pulled property records. Everything was in his name now. I called the family attorney. He couldn't comment, because the will had already been processed. I filed a request with the county for a copy of the death certificate, and most importantly, the will. And when I saw it, my blood ran cold. It had been revised just 2 months before she died, and I wasn't in it. Not once. No letter. No memento. No goodbye. The same woman who kept my baby teeth in a box and cried on my graduation day had supposedly erased me from her last words. No. Not June Carter. Not my mom. That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with grief. I was dealing with a crime. And Roy, he had no idea what was coming. I didn't cry the night I read that will. I didn't scream. I didn't crumble. I got cold, focused. And suddenly I remembered who my mother had raised me to be. She didn't raise a coward. She raised a woman who knew how to fight back. First, I called a friend from college, Tamara, who now worked at a mid-tier law firm in Seattle. She wasn't a top-name attorney, but she had one thing that mattered more. She believed me. "You're saying your mother changed her will right before she died and cut you out completely?" Tamara asked. "Yes. And I don't believe she was in the right state of mind when she did it," I replied. "All right," she said. "Let's see what we can dig up." We started with the basics medical records. Tamara filed a legal motion to access my mother's health history during the last 6 months of her life. We had to prove there was reasonable suspicion that she was either coerced or not mentally competent when she signed the revised will. And bingo, the hospital records were damning. June Carter had been admitted twice for injuries that were listed as accidental, a fractured wrist, and severe bruising on her ribs. The nurses noted she was nervous, avoided eye contact, and once even said, "I'm just clumsy. Roy doesn't like when I leave things out." Tamara read that line out loud and said, "That's emotional abuse. And maybe physical, too. But it wasn't enough. We needed proof of coercion." So, I went back to her house. Roy had moved out after selling the property, but the new owner, a kind, elderly woman named Bonnie, allowed me inside to collect anything that had belonged to my mother. She said she had found a few boxes in the attic with June's name on them. Inside, one of them was a small floral journal. The first half was normal grocery lists, doctor appointments. But near the end, her entries got darker, more paranoid. Roy says I don't need to talk to Evelyn. He says she'll just take advantage of me. I don't remember signing that paperwork. He said I did, but it's all a blur. If anything happens to me, I want Evelyn to know I tried. That was it. That was the smoking gun. Tamara nearly dropped the journal when she read it. But fate wasn't done twisting the knife just yet. While building the case, Tamara suggested I speak to Roy's ex-wife. She might have insight into his past behavior, she said. So, I tracked her down. Her name was Deborah. She worked at a diner outside of Coeur d'Alene. I introduced myself and told her everything. She stared at me for a long moment, then quietly said, "You're not the first one he's done this to." She pulled out her phone and showed me an old photo her son Kevin. "Kevin was my boy from a previous marriage," she said. "Roy never liked him, said he was soft. When Kevin turned 18 and asked to move out, Roy kicked him out with no money, no goodbye. Kevin took his life 2 years later. I felt my stomach churn. And when my mom died, Deborah added, Roy told me not to bother going to the funeral. He said, people like us don't need closure. That man doesn't just take money. He takes goodbyes. I walked out of that diner shaking. But now I was more than angry. I was on a mission. We filed the lawsuit 2 weeks later, fraudulent will. Emotional and psychological coercion. Elder abuse. I knew Roy would lawyer up. He wasn't stupid, but he didn't expect me to show up to the first court hearing with my mother's journal medical records and a sworn affidavit from his ex-wife. Roy's expression in court was priceless, like someone watching a ghost walk into the room. For the first time, he looked small. He tried to play the grieving widower. He brought in pictures of vacations and letters, signed by my mom with hearts and kisses. He even cried during his testimony. But then we submitted the journal entry. And then Tamara dropped another bombshell. Remember, the lawyer who couldn't comment earlier. Turns out he had been Roy's buddy from his Navy days, and had drawn up the revised will, without a psychiatric evaluation despite my mom being on multiple medications affecting cognition. Conflict of interest. Violation of fiduciary responsibility. Judge Alvarez's face turned stone cold. And then came the biggest twist of all. The court summoned the notary, who had witnessed the revised will. A woman named Patricia. When asked to testify, she paused, and then said I was never in the room with Mrs. Carter. Roy brought the documents to me, and said she couldn't travel because she was too emotional. I trusted him. I shouldn't have. Perjury, fraud, coercion. Roy's case fell apart like wet tissue paper. In the end, the court voided the revised will, reinstated the original one, and launched a formal investigation into Roy for elder abuse. He didn't just lose everything he stole. He was publicly humiliated, blacklisted by every social circle in town, and left utterly alone. No one sat with him in court. No one visited him afterward. No one mourned the man he pretended to be. And as for me, I stood on the porch of my mother's house, my house now, and opened the front door with the original key I'd kept since I was 13. I walked into her kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, and whispered, "We did it, Mom." I thought that winning in court would bring me peace, and it did. For a while. But justice isn't the same as healing. Justice is loud. It's banging gavels and shattered egos. Healing is quiet. It's the silence after the shouting stops. And for weeks after the trial, that silence ate at me. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, haunted by everything I hadn't seen, everything I should have seen. Why didn't I push harder? Why didn't I call more? Visit more? I kept replaying it, her voice growing fainter, her laugh shrinking her world, narrowing until it was just her and him and the cage he built around her. One night I found myself rummaging through the attic again. There was one final box I hadn't opened. It was tucked behind an old suitcase sealed with duct tape. Inside my childhood drawings, crayon heart with me plus mom scrawled in shaky letters, a faded stuffed rabbit I thought I'd lost, and at the bottom, a sealed envelope. My name was written in her handwriting. I froze. It wasn't dated. It wasn't even sealed with a stamp, just tucked closed. Hands trembling, I opened it. My sweet Evelyn, if you're reading this, then something's happened. I'm sorry. I didn't say goodbye. I'm sorry I let Roy convince me you didn't need me anymore. The truth is, I was scared. Every time I tried to reach out, he made me feel like a burden. He made me believe I was protecting you by staying quiet. But I see now, I was wrong. I should have fought harder. You are the best thing I ever did in this life. I hope you know that. Love you always. Mom. I broke. Utterly. I didn't just cry. I sobbed. The kind of sobbing that empties your chest and leaves you gasping like you've run out of air. All the anger, all the determination, all the armor I'd built since her death. It cracked. I curled up on the attic floor, holding that letter sobbing into the dusty cardboard until morning light seeped in through the vent. That was my emotional breaking point. Not the funeral. Not the will. Not even the courtroom. It was the realization that even in her final moments she still blamed herself for how he made her feel. After that night I disappeared for a while. Turned off my phone. Logged out of everything. I rented a cabin on the Washington coast and stayed there with nothing but her letter, a stack of legal documents, and a storm of questions. The waves outside crashed like the thoughts in my head. How many women had Roy broken this way? How many daughters like me had walked away thinking silence was strength, only to realize too late that they should have stayed and fought, but then another thought struck me. Maybe it wasn't too late. Not for me. Not for the next woman. I started writing. Not a journal. Not a legal summary. A statement. A testimony. I poured it all out, every red flag I missed, every lie I believed, and every gut feeling I pushed down. I wrote about the silence in abusive relationships, the way manipulation wears people down slowly, invisibly. And when I finished, I posted it. Anonymously at first, then under my name. I didn't expect much, but 3 days later, I got an email. Then another, and another. Over 50 women wrote to me. Some had known Roy. Others had married men like him. One woman said, "Your words made me realize I'm not crazy. I'm not alone." I couldn't stop crying. Because suddenly, the grief wasn't just mine. It was a shared wound, and somehow that made it hurt less. A month later, the DA's office reached out. They'd received additional reports about Roy after the court verdict. The judge's scathing opinion had opened the door for deeper investigation. One of the complaints came from a nurse. She said Roy had accompanied June during her last hospital visit and refused to let the staff speak with her alone. He even tried to prevent them from administering certain medications. That nurse had been working night shifts and missed the initial trial, but when she read my story online, She came forward. That testimony led to an official charge obstruction of medical care and willful neglect. Roy's case was reopened this time as a criminal one. I didn't attend the second trial. I didn't need to. I'd already said goodbye. But I did get a call from Tamara, and I'll never forget her words. He pled guilty to lesser charges, got 2 years probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. But more importantly, his reputation is finished. He's done. And me. I didn't go back to teaching right away. I took time. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping others recognize the signs I missed. I told my story when it was asked for. I listened when others needed to speak. One woman hugged me and said, "You sound like someone who found her voice the hard way." I smiled. I did. I told her, but I kept it. It's strange how grief works. It's not linear. Some days I miss my mom so much it feels like a scream inside my chest. Other days, I smile when I hear a song she loved, or when I find her old recipe card for lemon bars. But through it all, I carry her letter. I laminated it and keep it in my wallet, because every time I doubt myself, I read her words. You are the best thing I ever did. No judge can hand you healing. No courtroom can rewrite your past. But sometimes fighting back, that's where healing starts. After everything, after the court, battles the letter, the storm of memories, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. Justice had been served. But what do you do when the person you were fighting for is already gone? That was the question that lingered echoing in my chest as I returned to my normal life, or tried to. The house was mine now, the one Roy had tried to erase me from. But it didn't feel like home. Not yet. I wandered the halls for weeks barefoot, coffee always going cold in my hands. I kept expecting to hear her, my mother, in the kitchen, humming a Motown tune, fussing over some plant. But there was only silence. I thought about selling the place, moving back to Seattle, starting over. That's when Mrs. Hernandez knocked on my door. She lived across the street, a retired school teacher, silver curls and sharp eyes. She and my mom used to garden together on weekends. They even traded tomato plants and pie recipes. "I saw your lights on late," she said. "Thought you might want company." She stepped inside like she'd never left. We sat at the table where I'd once done third-grade math. She brought lemon tea and banana bread. Mom's favorite. It was like being 10 years old again, only now the house felt like a museum. Mrs. Hernandez looked around and sighed. She loved this place, she said. Loved you even more. You know that, right? I nodded. But something in my face must have betrayed me. You don't believe it, she said gently. You think you failed her. My throat tightened. She didn't need you to save her, Evelyn. She needed you to live, to thrive. That's how we honor our mothers, not by carrying their pain like a flag, but by turning it into something they'd be proud of. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. It was of my mom laughing, covered in garden dirt, holding a crooked sunflower. She always said you were her sunshine, she whispered. That night, I stood in the backyard for a long time, looking out at the overgrown garden. The soil was dry. Weeds had taken over, but the roots, my mother's roots, were still there. So I made a decision. Not to sell, not to run, but to plant. The next morning, I bought gloves, tools, and packets of seeds. I started with tomatoes, then lavender, then roses. It was messy, back-breaking work, but it was also sacred. Every cut, every blister, felt like a release. And something strange began to happen. Neighbors started stopping by. A teenage girl named Maya asked if she could help, because my mom says I need a hobby. A widower dropped off old flower pots. Even Bonnie, the woman who bought the house after Roy came by with bulbs from her own garden. Without planning it, I had begun rebuilding the very thing Roy tried to destroy community. One Saturday, as I was planting marigolds along the front fence, a woman approached slowly. She was tall, maybe mid-40s, with tired eyes but a kind smile. She introduced herself as Rachel. "You don't know me," she said, "but I read your letter. The one about your mom. About Roy." My stomach tightened. She took a breath. "I dated him. Briefly. After your mother passed, he told me awful things about her. Said she was paranoid. Hysterical. He even mentioned you. Said you were estranged and manipulative." I clenched my jaw. "And you believed him?" I asked quietly. She looked ashamed. "At first, yes. But something felt wrong. I found your post a few weeks later, and it hit me like a punch in the chest. I just wanted to say thank you for telling the truth. You probably saved me from something much worse." That was the moment I knew. It hadn't all been for justice or revenge. It had been for prevention. For every woman who might have walked into Roy's shadow, and that made it worth every second. Eventually, I returned to teaching, but part-time. The rest of my days were devoted to something new, something I never expected: a community initiative for elder protection and legal literacy. We called it June's Light. Free resources, emotional support, help navigating inheritance and healthcare rights. It started small, one table at the local library, but it grew faster than I imagined. And through it all, I kept that letter in my wallet. I read it every time I spoke to a daughter confused by silence, every time I helped a mother too scared to speak up. It reminded me that love isn't just something you remember. It's something you continue. One afternoon, I stood at my mother's grave, fresh roses in hand, lavender from our backyard in my pocket. "I wish you'd known what your story would become," I said. "I wish you'd seen the women you saved just by living and by leaving traces for me to follow." The wind blew gently. A sunflower tilted toward the sun. I took a deep breath. "I'm not just your daughter anymore," I whispered. "I'm your legacy." And I walked away head high, heart clear, not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as someone who had chosen again and again to grow from the ashes. The moment I made the decision to reclaim my life, I didn't hesitate. I knew exactly what I had to do. I filed for the final part of the revenge I had been plotting in silence, the public reckoning. It wasn't enough to win in court. Roy needed to face the truth, not just in a sterile courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. He needed to be exposed for the fraud he was. I called a press conference, one that I'd been preparing for months. The first words out of my mouth set the tone. "Many of you know me as the daughter of June Carter, But most of you have never known the truth about her marriage to Roy. I laid it all out. The manipulation, the emotional abuse, the fraud, the will he'd forged, the rights he'd stolen from me and from her. I even read the letter she'd left behind, the letter she'd written in secret, that Roy never wanted anyone to see. And I didn't just stop at him. I made sure every shred of evidence, every detail of his wrongdoing was laid bare. I spoke about the emotional scars he'd left on so many people, the women he'd used and discarded. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't just clearing my name. I was speaking for all the women whose voices Roy had stolen. The media picked up the story, and suddenly Roy wasn't the respected widower anymore. He was a pariah. His old colleagues came forward, some too scared to speak before others disgusted by the man they thought they'd known. The lies unraveled in front of his eyes as his reputation crumbled. It was as if the walls he'd built to isolate my mother, and now me, came crashing down around him. Within weeks, his business deals evaporated. Invitations stopped coming. He became a figure of scorn wherever he went. His so-called friends turned their backs. It was his own betrayal of my mother that became his undoing. And as for me, I stood tall in front of the press, proud of the decision I made. For the first time since her death, I felt like I had finally done right by my mom. Roy had been forced to face the consequences of his actions, not just legally, but socially. It was my moment of vindication, my moment of justice. For once, everything felt as it should be. I don't carry anger with me anymore. Not because I forgot, but because I refuse to let it define me. I wake up in the home my mother once loved, now blooming with new life. Her garden is alive again. The laughter of neighbors, the quiet strength of community, and the echo of her voice in every corner remind me this is my space now. The scars Roy left didn't break me. They shaped me. They taught me that silence doesn't protect love, boundaries do. That dignity isn't handed to us, we claim it. That no matter how deep someone tries to bury us, the truth always rises. I lost my mother, yes. But I found myself, and I'll never let anyone take that away from me again. If you've ever been shut out, silenced, or made to feel like you didn't matter, know this. You do, you always have. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story touched something in you, share it. Leave a comment or tell your story. We're stronger when we speak together. And if nothing else, remember this. Your worth isn't up for debate, not in court, not at a grave, not ever.